Disclaimer: the following video can contain spoilers.
Years after taking a demonic entity as a partner, Ellen, Lily Rose Depp, has moved on and married Thomas, Nicholas Holt, a young entrepreneur trying to create a better future for them. When an opportunity comes for riches, Thomas ventures into Transylvania in order to get Count Orlok, Bill Skarsgård, to sign paperwork for the purchase of Grunwald Manor back in Würzburg. Unbeknownst to him that Orlok is actually Nosferatu, the demonic plague-bearing vampire attached to Ellen. Robert Eggers definitely has a unique style, one of which I find interesting because I like how, in a way, it's both theater and film combined. It's very visually pleasing, and everything comes together very nicely. The acting and composition in relation with cinematography is meticulously planned out to give that theatrical feeling, using a film medium to really bring everything together. As for the story, I don't know how I feel about it. I like Robert Eggers' style. It's rugged and dark, but you're still invested in these stories and worlds. However, it's part of the story that left me with that mixed feeling because I'm not entirely a fan of this genre or type of story. In short, I thought the movie was going to be different or play out differently. Don't get me wrong, everything else about the movie I appreciate and enjoyed. And sure, arguably, I did like some parts of the story. Though it isn't for me, I can see how it was excellently crafted, where in the end, the movie presented a story through this theatrical slash film like style that was very visually pleasing to see. Let's begin. The movie opens up with a crying woman named Ellen. She allows an evil entity of comfort to be part of her life, practically binding her life to him. Unfortunately, Nosferatu was the one who answered, and he took no time to cling on to her, both metaphorically and literally. Years later, she's woken abruptly from a dream. Her husband, Thomas, could be accepted into a position within this firm that could prove profitable. But in order to secure that position, he has to go to Transylvania to get Orlok to sign some paperwork. This opening confused me a bit, and it wasn't until my second watch where I put the pieces together and realized what I had missed. That being Ellen's prayer and Orlok's answer. I thought she was scared and praying for someone because of Nosferatu, not that Nosferatu was a result of the prayer. I also didn't know Ernok, Simon McBurney, was the same person as the twisted and demented follower of Orlok later on. I did have a suspicion because of the scrolls and paperwork on his desk when he informed Thomas of this business opportunity, but it didn't click until my second watch.
He lives in a small country east of Bohemia, isolated in the Carpathian Alps.
As well as the conversation with Thomas and Orlok. But that was after the opening, so I'll talk about this one later. Although part of the story was already tipping the scales of my likings, I did like certain shots, angles, and effects within this opening. For example, when Ellen is taking up this entity and Nosferatu answers her call, his shadowy figure comes through the curtains in a very cool and menacing way. Ellen urges Thomas not to go on account of her fear and vision with death. But Thomas's view of a future far greater than he can imagine convinces him everything will be fine. That night, Ellen cuts a strand of her hair, places it in a locket, and hands it to Thomas the following day. With an inner cut of a nude man performing a seance of some kind, I was not sure how I'm feeling so far of the movie. On the one hand, it's visually pleasing, like I've mentioned before. But on the other, I'm not sure I'm liking part of the story. And it does have to deal with the contents of the story being more heavily focused on sexual gratitude and satanic elements, other than the outline of a story being a couple struggling to get a vampire out of their life, in its most basic form. Though I understand I signed up for this movie when I went to go watch it, I just didn't know how in depth it was going to be in regards to both of these aspects. And yes, it gets more wild later on. Thomas arrives at a small inn where more people tell him to be wary and pray. But ignoring the signs yet again, he carries on with his task. Arriving at the castle, Orlok wishes to sign the deed in the dead of night. Confused, Thomas agrees on account of his fear of this man. And my goodness, Bill Skarsgård did a fantastic job. I will say that at times I had no idea what Orlok was saying, which was unfortunate because several parts of dialogue in this scene were crucial. Part of that being the signing of separation in exchange for money, of which on my first watch, I had assumed that that was his payment for going out of his way to allow Urlach to sign the paperwork. But boy, was I mistaken. But like I said, on my second watch, I understood it more and liked how it was his actions that brought this monster into their lives again. And this time, Nosferatu will cling on tighter to Ellen. Now that the job is seemingly done, Thomas wants to leave but is denied by Orlok. That night, Orlok feasts on some of Thomas's blood, making him drowsy and full of fatigue. Fearing for his life, Thomas tries to leave but comes across a coffin, and sleeping inside it is Orlok. Before he can strike Orlok, something he saw the people back in the village do, Orlok wakes up and tries to get Thomas killed. Again, there are many shots and composition / cinematography elements within this scene that I just love. You can clearly tell that you're watching a movie that was carefully thought about when making it. And these type of movies tend to do well because of all the thought process that goes into making it. Things make sense and flow nicely, and pair that up with a visually pleasing format through cinematography, composition, color palette, acting, etc., you tend to enjoy what you're watching. That is, if the story doesn't take you out of the moment like it did to me. At the same time, Ellen seemingly gets ill. Her possessions come every nightfall like clockwork, making Dr. Wilhelm Sivers, Ralph Ineson, seeks the help of his former mentor and alchemist, Albin Eberhard von Franz, William Defoe. When von Franz takes a look at Ellen, she asks him, "Does evil come from within us or from far beyond?" I found this set of dialogue intriguing because I figured that was the theme of the movie. And coming into play this late in the movie fascinated me. I'm sure I could be wrong, but in the chance that I am not, this story has to deal with an outside force that in a way inflicts this evil. But at the same time, Ellen seemingly accepts this evil. So was she already evil inside to begin with, which is why she accepted this outside evil? Do these things happen because evil is inside us already?
Does evil come from within us or from beyond?
It's an interesting concept that is attached to the story, though it's delivered in a weird way. Of course, I'm talking about Ellen's character in regards to her bizarre behavior when being influenced by Orlok, the sexual gratifications, and the dark and greedy story itself. It was an interesting concept, no less. I will say though, at the end, I am not entirely sure what to make of this theme. So let me know down in the comments below what you thought about it. The cargo ship holding Orlok arrives, and a crate full of infested rats with the plague begins scattering throughout the land. Thomas returns, but in poor health. Checking on the corpse of the sailors from the cargo ship, von Franz now understands the great threat that has arrived at Wisburg, the vampire Nosferatu. Denying herself to Nosferatu angered him that he gives Ellen 3 nights for her to change her mind or suffer the death of loved ones for her transgressions. Frederick, Aaron Taylor Johnson, kicks both Ellen and Thomas out of his house, but on the second night, Orlok drinks the blood of Frederick's wife and children. If there's one way to demonstrate the vileness and malicious intent of an antagonist, it's having him or her have no remorse for the damage he or she is causing. Killing innocent children that have nothing to do with Nosferatu's goal, but being people Ellen loves, was super depressing to see. It definitely adds stakes and emotional response from the audience, and it made me feel extremely bad for Frederick, who definitely had it bad in this movie. He deserved better because all he did was try and help Thomas and Ellen out of the kindness of his heart. And how he was repaid was horrible. But of course, in tone with the story, he leaves this world by doing unspeakable things to his wife's corpse. A plan is set forth to kill this shadow forever, but requires a sacrifice. Ellen accepts her role in the plan, and on the 3rd night, Ellen bids Nosferatu to come to her, setting the plan in motion. Locating Nosferatu's grave, they set it ablaze so that he cannot return to slumber in the daytime. But this turns out to be a distraction from the plan. It was only meant to keep Thomas away from Ellen, so that she can kill Nosferatu. Ellen's sacrifice was the cause of Orlok's death. Her distraction and tender body allowed for time to pass until the first crow croaked, killing the shadow known as Nosferatu. Well then, that is one heck of a final image. With that said, Nosferatu was a very interesting movie, to say the least. I enjoyed it for what it was, even if my presumption of the movie wasn't quite accurate, and despite the awkward and sexual tension story. The main reason I felt the movie succeeded was how the movie was made, From the cinematography, acting, and composition, the movie was well crafted. I'm also going to mention that I really like the mise en scène with the costumes, set design, backgrounds, etc., etc. It's a time period that always makes me like the world more. I'm not entirely sure why. I do love the fact that when watching it, it does feel like you're watching theater, as well as the mystery behind the world and the tension Nosferatu brings. You are hooked to both the story and screen as you see how these characters defeat Nosferatu. The problem I had, though, were the contents within the story itself. I understand its role and importance to the story, but this type of content isn't for me. I'm not a big fan of this sexual tension and inducement the story had, not to mention the demonic presence it had. But that's just me. It doesn't necessarily make the movie bad, I'm simply stating my opinions in the matter. Overall, Robert Eggers' style is quite unique, blending a sort of theatrical element with the craftsmanship of a film through composition, for example, is well thought of and well executed. Cinematography is smooth and precise, and while the acting is phenomenal. His form of storytelling is both memorable and enjoyable. Whether or not you like the contents of the story, you can at least admire his style. It's a form style that hooks you to the screen. The performance was really captivating and honestly quite frightening. Ellen's portrayal in this, being the possessed person, shook me to my core. And that was because I'm still incapable of understanding how she managed to do it. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure how I feel about this movie. On the one hand, I love every aspect of the technological aspect of the film, from its composition, color palette, cinematography, acting, etc. But on the other hand, part of the story, mainly the sexual tension between Orlok and Ellen, yes, I understand that's literally the plot of the movie, but damn. It got a bit over the top. Not in terms of acting, but in terms of what is going on.
But anyways, those are just my thoughts. Did you enjoy the movie? Let me know what you thought about it down below, and I'll see you in the next review. Until then, God bless.